अंडा दे दे इसमें।
अंडा ऐसे ही देते हैं।
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We'll wait for some like another 7-8 minutes and then we'll start with the session. You can see there are more people joining, so I want to wait for some more time and then we'll start with the session. I hope all of you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I hope all of you can hear me clearly. Before I start with the session, a small request to everyone. So basically, please don't unmute yourself because there's a lot of audience and it will become difficult for me if a lot of people will unmute themselves. What we'll do is, I'll actually walk you through one of the system design question today as a part of this discussion. And in case if you have any questions, you can put your questions on the chat and I'll try to take all those questions after I'm done with one part of the session. So basically I'll distribute the session into multiple parts, and once I'll complete, explaining one particular part of a design, then I'll actually give you time to ask some questions, and then, then you can ask your questions over the chat and I'll try to answer your questions. Also, in case if you feel that you can't hear me clearly, then one of you can just unmute yourself and let me know, and hopefully it should not happen. There shouldn't be any issue. But in case if it happens, then you can unmute yourself and let me know if you can't hear me clearly. Okay. Quick introduction about myself. So I'm Prakhar Agar. I'm currently working as a software engineer at Google, and as a part of this session is sponsored by LearnBy, as you know, and as a part of this session, we'll try to cover video streaming application. Now, as a there are two particular questions which falls under the category of video streaming system design. The first category is basically when you have to design the system for the static files, something like YouTube videos and Netflix, where the files are not changing. The files are very static. The content is static. Basically, at the runtime, there is no change in the file. And then the second kind of system designs which you get on the video streaming applications is the Zoom application or Google Meet application, where the live data has to be shared with the people, and there will be multiple people will be joining as a part of the same meeting, and everyone of us should be able to everyone, I mean, whosoever is delivering or whosoever is speaking, that data should be converted into the bytes over the servers, and then should be broadcasted to all the audience present in a meeting. So today, as a part of this discussion, we'll be focusing on the dynamic video streaming application, which is more complex compared to the static video streaming application. Now, as a part of this discussion, we'll divide the whole problem into 4 different parts. So, any system design question is distributed into 4 main parts. It starts with requirements gathering. As a part of the requirements gathering, we try to figure out what are the functional and non-functional requirements. The functional requirements are the requirements which are generally given by the end users or your product managers at the starting of the project design or your PMs. And during the interview, it will be given by your interviewers, or you can actually discuss these details with your interviews and come up with the functional requirements. Then there is something known as non-functional requirements. As a part of the non-functional requirements, we try to figure out if what are the different considerations we need to make in our design, so that our design is robust and it serves the purpose of whatever we are planning to serve as a part of the functional requirements. Also, the end user experience is not hampered if you have to, if you are, I mean, if the end user is on your platform. Something like scalability, availability, consistency will fall into the category, this particular category. We'll try to see what exactly does this mean, and we'll try to see how exactly we can actually, talk about different non-functional requirements and how to consider these non-functional requirements, and from which will vary from your design to design. Once you're done with the requirements gathering, the second thing which you need to do is the estimations. So basically, you need to do some calculations of you need to do the capacity planning. So you'll have to make some assumptions before you start coming up with the capacity planning or QPS planning. So capacity planning is basically planning the amount of data which you need to store into your data store within next 1 year, or within next few years. So we'll do capacity planning based on the amount of data we need to store in our system. And then there is something called QPS planning, which is known as the number of requests, the read requests which you have to handle in the system, and the number of write requests which you have to handle in the system. Correct? So there are two parts, right? Requirements gathering, estimations. Under estimations, again, there are two parts: capacity planning and QPS planning. Under QPS planning, again, we have a read QPS and the write QPS. Capacity planning is the amount of storage which you'll need in next 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. So I'll do it for 1 year for now. QPS planning is the number of queries per second you will receive. It can be read query or the write query is the number of queries per second which you'll receive on your system. So these are the estimations. Then the third part of the any design question is to figure out all the detailed design. As a part of the detailed design, you will figure out what are the different database or storage you'll require. You'll figure out all the APIs which you'll require as a part of your system, how your server and client will be connected. You'll come up with a high level design, client server client connection. What is the high level design of your system? So we'll talk about the HLD. Then there are other parts as well, like you might have queues in your system, so you'll have queues, or if not queues, then you might have other details which you might want to share, like sharding, replication. Then you have authentication, authorizations, or auths. So all these will fall, and like load balancer and bunch of other details will fall under this category. Once you're done with the detailed design, then you have to work on the monitoring and alerting part as a part of this design. So to talk about monitoring and alerting, like what are the different, what all details will you monitor as a part of this design, what all different graphs you'll create as a part of this design, what all metrics will you raise the alerts. Generally, there are two categories again in the monitoring and alerting. The reliability metrics you'll create. So for monitoring, you'll create the metrics. So bunch of them will be reliability metrics. The rest of them will be product related metrics. This will be useful to actually, sorry, is there anyone speaking anything? If yes, then please, if you can go on mute, that would be great. And you can put your question on the chat if you have any question. Yeah, so basically product metrics, monitoring and alerting, and you have a reliability metrics and you create a product metrics. Reliability metrics is to measure how your system performance, how is your system performing. Metrics is to see how your product is performing. Basically, if the number of users are growing up, number of users are going down, what is the success funnel, basically at what rate the users are dropping off, they're dropping off, at what rate the users are joining. So based on those, you actually figure out how your product is performing. And reliability metrics is basically checking the QPIs, the latency, the end user experience. All those will fall as a part of your reliability metrics. Okay, I hope this much is clear to everyone. I'll stop here for 30 seconds, and I would request all of you to actually go through these details, and then we'll start we'll start with the actual design. So if you have any questions, I'll stop here for 30 seconds or 1 minute. Please put your questions, and then we'll start with the next set of design. We'll start designing the Zoom app. Okay, cool. So there are a couple of questions. There are a few questions which I've got. Can you please repeat the difference between reliability and product metrics? Sure, I'll do that. Are these fixed or may vary as per company's way of working? So generally, let's start with the first question. So can you please repeat the difference between the reliability and product metrics? So basically, reliability metrics are the metrics which are created more to see, from the engineering perspective to see how your actually, system is performing. Basically, what is the latency of your API? Is it taking more than the expected time to return the response? What is the QPS at which your APIs are hit? If you want to add more resources or remove some of the resources because the traffic is not that high, or the traffic is very high, but your system is not responding, so you may have to add more, add more resources. So those are all reliability metrics to see if the system is robust enough or reliable enough or not, and you need to take some actions. Or if there are some failures on your system, then there should be monitoring and there should be alerting on the top of it. So those all falls into the category of the reliability metrics. But product metrics are the metrics which are used to see how your product is performing. So let's say how many 7-day active users are there on your platform, 28-day active users on their platform, how many of users are actually new signups on a daily basis, how many users are actually attending the meeting, how many of the users are actually creating the meeting, how many of them are the premium user, non-premium users. So those are all metrics which are used to actually, which will fall under the product metrics category. This is mostly used to see your product growth and mostly used by your product managers, and can be used by engineers as well, but to see the impact of your product. Reliability metrics is to just make sure that your system is up and running, correct? So the success rate is high for your system. Are these fixed or vary as per company's way of working? I mean, most of the things are fixed here. I mean, I've just listed on the four more important things as a part of any requirements. Any system design which are required. Now, I mean, the details might vary from company to company, and you don't need to talk about each of these details in every single interview which will be going through. But because if you have a high level template in your mind that how to attempt a design question, then this is a good way to start up any particular design question, because that if you will follow this question, you'll be able to cover most of the points which are required to be covered as a part of this design. The third question was, the third question was, are these standard steps? Okay, because I feel some may not be applicable. Yeah, I mean, some of them might not be applicable to the Zoom system design, so we'll just skip those ones. Response time of API, failure rate, success rate, monitoring the service, reliability. Yes, that's correct. These are all this will fall into the reliability metrics. Okay, now let's move on to the requirements gathering part for this particular system design. So what are the requirements which will require as a part of the system? I hope all of you can see my screen. We'll start with the functional requirements. Let's talk about the different functional requirements which are needed as a part of this particular design. Okay. So the first one is you should be able to support. User should be able to schedule a meeting. So user should be able to log in and register into the system. Correct. User should be able to create a meeting and share a meeting link. Keeping it very simple, this is not a Google Meet, this is a Zoom meeting. You can create a meeting and we can share this meeting link with everyone. Should be able to create a meeting and share a meeting link with everyone. With the users, with the invitees, basically. We'll keep it very simple. So users should be able to log in, register. Users should be able to create a meeting and share a meeting link with the invitees. Finally, what we can do is after that, your user should be able to start 1:1 meeting or a group meeting. Correct. Now you can have a 1:1 call and you can have a group call. So you can support both. Start a 1:1 meeting or a group meeting. And basically you should be able to support audio and video conferencing, audio, video, and screen share functionalities as a part of this design. Now let's say screen share will remove it for now. We'll keep it very simple. Or you can do a screen share as well. There is nothing, I mean, nothing big will change if you do a screen share as well. But let's keep this as out of scope for now. Let's focus on the audio and video part because those are more important. from this design perspective. So I'm keeping this as out of scope for now. If the time will permit, then we'll actually talk about this as well. Okay, so these are the different functional requirements which are considering as a part of our design. Anything else? I mean, there can be a bunch of other requirements which you can take, but given the time constraint, we'll try to work on these main functionalities because that is what we need to support as a part of the Zoom streaming application, and these are the main requirements for our design. Now, let's talk about the non-functional requirements. So if you have any questions, then please put your question on the chat, and yeah, please put your question on the chat and try to answer it. Also, yeah, let me complete the non-functional requirement, and then I'll give you some time to ask questions. So as a part of the non-functional requirements, we need to consider some of the parameters. The most important ones are the latency, latency. Then you have availability and consistency. Latency here in this case is basically latency represents that the amount of time it takes for to send a request and get back the response. Here in this case, the latency should be almost real time, right? Because you should have almost real time experience to see a video streaming application. Basically, whatever I'm speaking, you should be able to listen to that almost at a real time speed, right? There should not be a lot of latency whenever it comes to the video streaming applications. Then there is an availability. So availability for this overall system should be high. Correct. Availability should be high because we want our system should be available for most of the times. We should be able to get the data. Here, consistency doesn't matter a lot because the data need not to be consistent, right? It could be possible that there are multiple users who have joined into the system or a particular meeting, but it could be possible that some of the people are unable to hear some of the details that you're sharing. And generally, consistency comes in terms of databases when we have to replicate the data amongst multiple databases. Here, when it comes to video conferencing app, we won't store any data in our system, right? We won't store data in our system. Why won't we store any data in our system? We'll come back to that. But let's say there are for the video streaming, we won't store any data, but we are creating the meetings, right? And we are creating the meetings and we are creating the meeting links, and let's say we are sharing those meeting links as well. And it could be possible that some of the users might not be able to access that meeting link for a couple of seconds, but eventually they are able to access it because it could be, or let's say if I started the meeting, but a couple of users are unable to join. Some of the users are not able to join that meeting, saying that the meeting has not been started for a couple of seconds. That should be okay, but our system should be highly available. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of CAP theorem, which says that you can't get consistency. Just give me a second. I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically, yeah, what I'm saying is here, unless we don't have to store any details, we don't really care about the consistency. But here we might want to store some other details like video conferencing app, or if the meeting has been started or not. So all those details might be maintained at a database layer. And if we have the replications, then and if in those replications, if there is a communication gap because of the network failure, then in that case, we might not get the consistency. What I'm not sure how many of you have heard of CAP theorem, which says that in a distributed system environment, you need to have a partition tolerance because your system should be able to return the response even if there is a network failure for a small amount of time between your multiple servers. And you can choose between the consistency or the availability of your system during the partition tolerance. Basically, if there is a network failure, then it should be able to return the expected response. Now, either you can choose availability as an expected, your system should be able to support the availability, or your system should be able to support the consistency. What you can do is, if you're not aware of the CAP theorem, I would recommend everyone to read about CAP theorem on your own and try to understand it. But basically, what I'm trying to say here is that, you don't consistency or availability, you have to choose when you have multiple replications of the same data. And it could be possible that, the data is not copied into the multiple replications and you're reading from
from a particular machine where the data is not yet present. So in that case, you might not get the consistent data. Now it could not be present because there might be a network failure, or you might be copying the data on a async basis between multiple replications of the same data. Then in that case, you might prefer availability. So if you prefer availability, then the system will return some response, but you might not get the expected data. So the data is not consistent, but you will at least get some response. If you prefer availability over consistency over availability, then you need to make sure that the data is copied in all the systems, and then you only return success. So in that case, if let's say there is one server which is there is a network failure for one of the server, then if you're trying to write the data in one of the system, one of the machine, then because you can't write the data because there is a network failure, you can't write the data in all three machines or all successful all the successive machines, then you will fail the request. So you are trying to maintain the consistency, but by not writing the data and make sure that the data, whatever data we are trying to read, is consistent. Then in that case, what we'll miss on is the availability, because when you're trying to write the data, you will actually fail that request, and you will say that something went wrong and you should write after some time. So uh, basically, what we are trying to achieve here is either we'll try to achieve for any system. Whenever there is a distributed system environment, we'll try to see either we need a consistency or availability. But generally, that is in terms of the storage layer. Here, what we want is that you have to deliver the data as soon as possible to multiple users. Now, here we can talk in terms of consistency. The way we can talk is that you might not all the users might see the data at the same time. Some of the users might get the response after a couple of seconds, but the data should be available for all the users who have joined a particular meeting. So we say that we will actually prefer availability over the consistency in this particular system whenever there is a network failure. So we'll need high consistency and high availability, but we'll prefer availability over the consistency. Okay. Yeah. If I think one of you has unmuted yourself, can you please go on mute? Sorry. Yeah. Now I'll stop here and I'll try to take questions which are mentioned. So how the performance streaming can be achieved, taking into consideration the network latency. We'll come on to that. We haven't discussed about the design yet, so we'll come on to that. What are we compromising here? I've already explained that. Media quality and conference capacity are major requirements of any system. Media quality, and yes, that's correct. What are the major factors that affect audio video quality, and what is the better design approach to make it better? We'll talk about that again. Eventual consistency, right? So here we'll prefer eventual consistency. Basically, it's okay even if someone actually listened to that particular audio after a couple of seconds compared to some other person. So we are preferring availability, and we'll prefer eventual consistency in this particular system. Okay, I'll give another 30 seconds. If you have any questions, please put your questions. Some of you have asked questions which are very specific to design, and we'll talk about that when we'll actually move to the design implementation, and we'll discuss those details there. So I mean, you'll have to wait for some time, and then I'll answer those questions. I mean, you'll automatically get the answers for those questions. I'll stop here, and if you have any questions for a minute, go through it, whatever I've mentioned so far. If you have any questions, please, you can ask your questions. Also, some of the other non-functional requirements which you need to consider here is like a reliability, which are same for all the system. Your system should be reliable. You need to make sure that it is secure. So all those are automatically considered as a part of your requirements. So
We are unable to hear.
Yeah, sorry. So there are a couple of questions. I'm so sorry. So basically, the question is, so in the non-functional requirement, we basically decide which of C and A I'll consider more with P from a CAP theorem. That's correct. So basically, generally, in the non-functional requirement, we will actually talk about these details because these are very important to talk about. Generally, you talk about three important things in the non-functional requirements. You can mention that your system should be reliable, secure, but you should always mention about the consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. And whenever you see that it's a scalable system, you'll need a distributed system environment. You pick either a consistency or availability in your system over the along with the partition tolerance for that particular system. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Now let's move on to the estimations part. Let's move on to the estimations part. So before I actually move on to the estimations, I want you to actually give me some assumptions. I want all of you to make some assumptions in 30 seconds. Try to see what all assumptions you'll have. So basically assumptions in the sense that how many users you want to support on a daily basis, or what are the daily active users, what are the total users, and then I want you to give me some numbers on let's say how many people on average are actually attending the meeting. So let's take all those into consideration, and then we'll work on the capacity planning and QPS planning for this. Let's make some assumptions for this design. So is anyone throwing any numbers to me? You can throw numbers, right? Total users and so you're saying that 50 to 10 use 100 users. So let's see. So let's actually figure out. I think you're all throwing very random numbers. 50, 100 is not good enough. Let's try to understand. See, let's say that we are having total users. Let's start with total users. So on Zoom, you have now total users are close to 300 million. Total users are 300 million. So total users are 300 million. Let's say that 10% of it are daily active users. So let's say there are daily active users are 13 million daily active users. And on an average, each of this user, 10% of these users actually, create a meeting. So we say that 10% of these users are creating a meeting. So create meeting, number of meetings on an average will be 10% of the users are creating the meeting. So we can say that 3 million users are creating a meeting. 3 million users creating one meeting in a day. Correct. So total number of meetings in a day will be close to 3 million. And we can say that on an average, each meeting is attended by 10 people. Okay, because there are 30 million users, right? So we say that each meeting on an average is attended by 10 users. Right? So 3 into 10 will give you 30 million daily active users. So that's how we are actually coming up with the estimations for this particular. We came up with some of the assumptions of this particular design. Okay, so we have total users as 100 million, daily active users as 30 million, and then we have 3 million users creating one meeting in a day, and each meeting on an average is attended by 10 users. Okay, now once we are done with the estimations, then we have to do the capacity planning and QPS planning, right? So let's do a capacity planning. Now to do a capacity planning, first we need to understand what data we'll be storing as a part of our system design. And to do the QPS planning, we need to understand what are the different APIs which will be exposed to the users to actually, read and write the data into a system. So, it's easier to do the QPS planning and capacity planning once we figure out all the APIs which we require in our system, and once we figure out all the APIs which will require in our system, and also once we figure out all the different databases or tables we'll have to create in our system. So we'll move on to the detailed design, and parallelly we'll work on the estimations as well. Let's go to the detailed design. let's try to actually list down all the tables which will require as a part of our design system design. Let's move on to the tables. Now see, in this particular design, we don't need to store the data which is which is streamed, the bytes which are streamed over the network. We don't DAUs are daily active users, that's correct. So basically we don't need to actually store the data which is streamed over the network. So basically whatever I'm speaking right now, unless we don't record it, we don't need to store it anywhere. Right now we were not considering the recording part, so I'm skipping that part for now. Because we are not considering the recording part, we'll skip it for now. If you are recording it, then you'll have to store it. Because we have not taken that into consideration, we'll skip it, and we don't store any data into our system, whatever is the streamed over the network when we are in the meeting. But there are some storage which we'll need for sure, right? We'll need the storage for each of the user who is signing up on our platform, right? Because we might have to maintain their profile. We'll have to give them some login password. They'll actually, they'll have to register on a platform and they'll log in into our system, and they can actually create a meeting as well. So we'll have to store all the meetings which has been created by particular users as well, right? So we have to maintain those details as a part of our system design. So let's try to focus on these two tables. So one is the user table, which we'll need for sure. In this user table, what all details are we storing? So let's say in the user table, we'll be storing user ID. We'll be storing their username. We'll be storing their password. Password will be stored in a one-way hash format, basically for the security purpose, so that no one can actually see your actual password. So we'll be storing the password in a one-way hash format. Then you will have, the name of the person. Then you can have or the name of the account with which the meeting has to be, all the meetings has to be scheduled. Name, you can have an email address if you want to store the email address. You can store some contact details as well. And you can have some image URL as well. Why do you store image URL? Because you have a blob storage where whenever there are bytes, data in bytes, and this is a static data, right? There's not a dynamic data because there will be a profile picture. You actually store it in the blob storage. Blob storage is an object storage which is stored very close to your web servers, basically very close to your client, so that you don't need to transfer a lot of bytes from the clients till the database to store these details. Instead, you store it very close to the user, so that when we have, and for those bytes, we get a URL, and we store the URL into our system. And whenever we have to read the data, we just read the URL. And for that URL, we actually go and read the bytes, which are sitting very close to the user, so that we don't need to perform a high IO input output bound, so that there is no high input output bound for a system when you're actually storing any static files or images in your static videos or static audios in your system. Okay. So I'll have the image URL. This is my user table. Then there is a second table which will be your meeting table or events table. Let's call it as a meeting table because generally we associate all the events as meetings in our Zoom. So in this we'll have a meeting ID. We'll have the meeting. We are not putting the invitees, right? We are not adding the invitees for now because we'll just create a link and then we'll ask everyone to join through the link. So we'll have a meeting ID. We'll have the owner, user ID, who has actually created this meeting. So we can say that this is my owner of the meeting. Correct. We'll have that meeting title. We'll have meeting title. We'll have meeting description if there is any description for that particular meeting. Then we'll have the start time of that meeting. Start time of that meeting. We'll have the duration for that particular meeting. So we have the start time. We have the duration for that meeting. After start time and duration, we will also have. So we have meeting ID, user ID, meeting title, description, start time, duration. And then we can have a meeting link as well, right? Like with which you will actually join the meeting. So we'll have a meeting link. So these are the details which we'll be storing as a part of our meeting. Is there anything else which I'm missing and is important from this design perspective? So we have meeting ID, user ID, meeting title, description, start time, duration, and meeting link. I think this is good enough information which I'll have to store for the meeting. Now we have figured out these are the two important tables which will be used to store the details. I don't think we need any other table to actually start the Zoom application design. So let's focus on these tables. Now, we know that these are the only two tables which we require as a part of the design. We can actually figure out how many KBs of data or bytes of data we have to store for the user. So user ID is basically 4 byte. Name will be around 20 characters or 20 bytes for that. For password, again 20 bytes. Name 20 bytes. Email address 10-15 bytes. Contact details again 15 bytes. Image URL is the URL which will take like a 1 KB or 2 KB of data. So I mean, we can assume that if it's a decent image with just the face, inserted, then we can say that we'll actually decrease the size of the decrease the quality of the image, and it will be up to 2 kb. So we'll ignore all this. So we can say that each user details will require around 2 kb of data to store the user details. In the meeting, basically we have meeting id, user id, meeting title, description, start time, duration. Those are like more or less metadata present. And like if you can have a longer description, you can have some document attached, have some start time, duration. Those are like 5, 10, 15, 20 bytes of data. Description can be a bit longer. So on an average, we are assuming that each of the meeting will have 200 bytes of data. So each of the meeting will have, each row in the meeting table will be created and will be storing around 200 bytes of data. So these are the two tables which we have created so far. Now we don't need to store any other data apart from these two tables in our system. So let's do a capacity planning for that for the next 1 year. Now we are saying that we will have total users as 300 million. So we'll have to create the profile for each of these users. So in the next 1 year, we'll have 300 million users. We are not considering any good growth. Let's consider the 10% growth. So we'll have 330 million of data. So 10% growth. So 300 million with which we started, and then we have 30 million of users which are signing up in the next 1 year. And basically, for each of these users, we have to store the 2 kb of data. And we have like 30 million meetings, 3 million meetings scheduled on a daily basis. So 3 million into 3 million meetings will increase to 365 days. So each day will schedule 3 million meetings. Into each meeting will store 200 bytes of data. If I do this calculation, this comes out to be 330 million into 2 kb of data plus 3 million into 365. So we'll approximate it to 400, which will take care of some of the number of meetings which will increase with time as well. So I'm multiplying it by 400 for next 1 year, approximating it into 200 bytes. Now, so this is million, right? So kb is basically 10 to the power 3. One kb has 10 to the power 3 bytes, 1024 bytes, which is approximately 10 to the power 3 bytes. M is equal to million, M is million, which is 10 to the power 6. So can we say that 10 kb will become MB and GB, because 1 MB is equal to 10 to the power 3 kb and 1 GB equal to 10 to the power 3 MB. So this 2 kb will become what? 2 MB now because of this million, 2 GB now because of this million, and then we have another 660. So can we say that 660 GB of data you'll have to store for the users details, and then 3 million into 400 into 200 bytes. So this comes out to be 412 into 224 into 10 to the power. So 240 into 10 to the power 3 we can write, into 10 to the power 3 into 10 to the power 6. Million is 10 to the power 6. Right? These are bytes. These are bytes. So this will be like KB, MB, and GB. So this comes out to be 660 GB of data plus around 240 GB of data for the meetings. Right? So 240 GB of data for the meetings. That comes out to be what? Around 240 is, this comes out to be 900 GB. So we can say that approximately we'll need 1 TB of data, 1 TB of data to be stored in our system to support these two tables in next 1 year without any replications. Correct? We're not creating any copy. So we'll 1 TB in next 1 year. Correct? Without any application. So that's how you do the capacity planning. I will come on to the QPS planning, but before that, I'll take again a break of 1 minute, and I want you to put your questions if you have one. Yeah, I'll have some water as well. I'll wait for 30 seconds to 1 minute, and you can put your question, and then we'll move on to the QPS planning. Okay, great. It seems like we have a lot of questions now. Let's go through each of these questions. So attendees of meetings. So in general, in Zoom, we don't actually whitelist any attendees. We actually create a meeting link and share it with people. But you can actually invite the meeting attendees as well. And in that case, you can simply create a list of user IDs who will be attending the meeting. Okay. It depends on you. If you want to store those details, you can store those details. But generally, I've seen that the Zoom meetings are open if we don't whitelist anyone. But if you want to whitelist, you can do that as well. So you can maintain the list of user IDs who can attend the meeting. Okay, so are we going to use a SQL database, right? Since we have more rights in this case, what is the preferred database? Good question, right? So it's always a challenge to decide between, whether you should go ahead and use the SQL database or NoSQL databases. I'll tell you a very good example to actually, decide if you should go ahead with the SQL databases or NoSQL databases. So, generally how I decide whether to choose between a SQL database or NoSQL database is basically I consider if I need the transactional functionalities or ACID properties which are supported by the SQL database or not. What I mean is that if there are multiple tables on which we have to perform the operations on a single transactions, basically if the write should be performed on multiple tables at the same time, and if one of the write fails, then the commit should be rolled back from all the tables. In those cases, you can go ahead and choose the SQL database. The other way to figure out whether to use a SQL database or NoSQL database is by checking if the data is well structured or not. Generally, NoSQL databases are used when your data is not very well structured. You have like a document databases, or you have like a hierarchy maintained, and you don't know there is more like a trie structure which you want to store in data, which is very difficult to maintain in your SQL databases. You have a key value pair. You don't know how many columns will be increased in future. You have to store the details like nodes and edges between those nodes. All those can be easily done in case of NoSQL databases compared to SQL databases. So if the data is well structured, generally I prefer to use SQL databases in those cases compared to NoSQL database. There are so I've talked about the advantages of SQL databases, but I didn't talk about the disadvantage of SQL databases and advantage of the NoSQL databases over the SQL databases. So, there are some functionalities which you get out of the box in the NoSQL database, which is basically mainly the CAP theorem. So if you have multiple nodes which you have spawned in a NoSQL database, and if you want to choose, you have to pick the distributed system, partition tolerance and a distributed system environment, right? You can actually easily choose between the consistency or availability in case of NoSQL databases. And it's easier to scale NoSQL databases compared to SQL databases, because if you have multiple instances of the same DB, and if you have to maintain the applications, then you have to write the logic to have the availability or consistency in your application layer. The SQL databases doesn't provide you that out of the box, which is provided by the NoSQL databases. Coming on to the question whether we should use the SQL DB or NoSQL DB in this particular design, is that you can use actually SQL DB because you have like 30 million or 300 million users. You can easily store that data in one single database itself. It's not a huge data, and you can easily store that data in one single machine. And same goes with the meetings, number of meetings, right? It's a very small bytes. And in case if you feel that you need more meetings, anyways, no one cares about the meetings which have been already attended. You can delete the meetings after 1 year or so, and you can maintain the database. So in this case, to be honest, it's very easy to maintain all this data over the SQL DB. You don't need to worry a lot about the scalability in terms of storing the data. We'll talk about the scalability when we'll talk about basically the video conferencing and sharing the data over the network. We'll talk about those things in detail, and there we'll have to handle the scalability. But scheduling the meeting and number of people attending the meeting should be fairly simple, and we don't need to worry about scheduling the meeting and number of total users on your platform and storing their profile details should not be a big scalable issue in this particular design. So you can easily use the SQL database in this case. So I hope everyone understood like what are the major differences between the SQL and NoSQL. As I told you, the main preference which I give to between the way I choose the SQL or NoSQL is looking at the kind of the data which I have to store in as a part of my databases. If it's a very well structured data, I prefer to go ahead with the SQL databases compared to NoSQL databases in those cases. Since we have more rights in this case, what is the preferred database? I already answered that question. Why duration column is required in the meeting table? Duration column is required in the meeting table because someone can take over the meeting, or you want to schedule, or I should not say someone should take over the meeting, but basically you want to show this meeting is scheduled from this meeting to this time, so that when user comes and see the meetings which are have been scheduled for today, they don't end up creating a conflicting meeting at the same time, right? So that's why we are creating a duration. You can have a start time or end time, or you can store the start time and the duration. Basically, duration can be 2 hours or 1.5 hours, and accordingly, your backend can create the end time, or you can store the end time here. Either ways, so you can store the start time and you can store the end time for this meeting. We should also store the creation timestamp. Always good to mention maintain the creation timestamp and update timestamps in your databases. Okay. By duration. So when we talk about the start time zones are auto-inclusive, right? So see, generally, whenever you store the data, start time or the end time, you actually try to store these details in the timestamp format and not on a particular zone format. The reason behind that is because you can have the users from different timestamps, different time zones, and you can always give them based on the users at which, based on the time zone at which from where they are attending the meeting, you can actually always convert your current timestamp into that particular time zone, right? So it's always better to store the details in the timestamp instead of storing these details as a part of your in a particular time zone. So when we talk about start time zone, right? Cassandra. Again, I won't talk about a particular database which should be used in this case. You can actually, I prefer to talk more about the logic. Cassandra is a NoSQL DB. You can actually use the NoSQL DBs. There is no harm in that as well. Generally, I mean, SQL or NoSQL either way is fine here because we don't need to maintain the transactional functionality here. And I mean, scalability wise also both the databases are fine. So you can go ahead with SQL or NoSQL database in this case. If you'll ask me, I would have preferred any SQL database in this case instead of a NoSQL database. Can you move screen to capacity requirements part? What is the question? If you can put the question, I can try to answer. I can move the screen to capacity estimations. You can do the capacity. At any time, if we have to add a free extra column which will significantly increase single row data, let us consider this case meeting table, then how will scale it? So, I mean, when you know that, if at any time you have to increase the number of columns, you always know the metadata, right? So if you know that, your column, your machine capacities handle like up to 5 TB or 10 TB of data, you actually do the horizontal scaling or the vertical scaling in those cases, right? You either actually shift the current machine to a bigger machine, or you actually add more machines to handle the data. And in that case, you'll have to perform the sharding strategy. There are multiple sharding strategies like hash-based sharding or range-based sharding. Here, because you know that you'll prefer to read the data for a particular date or for next 1 month or next few months, you can do a range-based sharding where you can actually range it. You say that I'll create a separate database for every month, every single separate machine for every month to actually store the meetings. That will simply help you to scale your database in that case. Okay. But here, I mean, looking at the current size of the database, you can actually store it in a single machine itself. Coming back to the next question, is there an impact if you use the NoSQL for structure and data when? I mean, you don't see again, right? The disadvantage is that you don't get the ACID properties or the transactional functionalities which you get as a part of the ACID. As a part of the SQL databases. You can use it in this design. Yes, as I told you, right? It should not matter a lot. Joins, I don't think it will actually make a lot of difference as well. As long as you are actually performing the joins in the right way, it should be fine to actually join two tables in the NoSQL databases as well. If we need to store the recording, then which database we should use? So if we have to store the recordings, then basically we'll have to come up with we can use again the SQL or the NoSQL databases. But like basically what you have to do is you have to actually divide this data into multiple smaller chunks first, and then in that case, because the system should be highly scalable, and I mean again you don't need the transactional functionalities there, it should be easily scalable. You can go ahead and use the NoSQL databases in those cases, because those are like more blob storage. Those are bytes of details which are bytes, and the data bytes which are trying to store. So in those cases, you can actually have a video ID and the bytes, the chunks which you want to store as a part of that particular, because for one particular video you might have 10 chunks. For another video you might have 20 chunks. For another video you have 30 chunks. It's not you can't create a one single table, right? You have to store the list of chunks or list of bytes, small packets. In those cases you can use something like a document database. You can store the data in the NoSQL database. SQL based most doesn't support data replication in multiple regions deployment, right? I mean, it doesn't support by default. You'll have to implement it on your own. So you'll have to write your own forwarding service, or you can use something called content delivery network, which you can read about. which actually tries to replicate the data over the multiple geographical regions if you want to replicate it. There is something called forwarding service which you'll have to write, which will read the data from your current databases and actually copy it on a non-consistent basis or async basis to other databases in the other geographical regions. Wouldn't it be good to store storage spaces like S3 instead of server and server the content from there for the recording instead of database? I mean, there are multiple solutions, as I told you, right? I don't want to dig down into that particular solution right now. Again, you're talking about Amazon S3, which is a very specific, solution which you're giving. Generally, when I talk about when I actually give, talk about a particular solution, I mean, it could be possible that some of you might not have used the Amazon S3. What you can do is you can actually use the blob storage as well. You can get the video URLs. You can store the list of video URLs. There will be transcoders, and between there will be a bunch of other things which you'll have to do if you actually go and actually try to store the data in our databases for this particular design, because you'll have to distribute it in this chunks. Hopefully, I'll have another session where I'll talk about the Netflix design or YouTube design, where you're uploading the content and recording the content and storing it. So I'll cover those details and cover those things in detail. Because of the shortage of time, I won't be able to cover everything. That's why I took a very limited requirements, and I'm trying to focus on the design which is important from this particular design. I mean, trying to focus on things which are important from the design perspective. Yeah, Amazon S3, you can use it. Again, there are pros and cons, but I don't want to go into the details right now because of the short of time. We can take this up as a part of another design question where we'll do a video conferencing, not a video conferencing, basically a YouTube design or a Netflix design or a recording, storing a recording of a particular meeting. Okay. So data sharding, you have to decide. There are two ways to do a sharding of the database. One is the range-based sharding. Another one is the hash-based sharding. In this case, you can do a range-based sharding. You can say that if you have, if suddenly like you have to store a lot of data, and if you have to add machines in future, you can do a range-based sharding, and range will be based on date. Now to start with, you can say that I'll add a new machine for every single month. Correct? If that for storing the invites, again, like if the invites are increasing suddenly, if the number of users are increasing, for users you can actually store the users based on the regions, or you can store the details. You can use the range-based sharding for the users. You can shard it based on the regions, or you can shard them based on the alphabetical, the names at which their name is, from where the initials of the names, or you can use a hash-based sharding where you're actually using the consistent hashing to store each of the users based on the user ID. Correct? In the meeting table, if you are crossing a particular limit of a particular meeting, like number of meetings you can store in one particular table, in one machine, then in that case you do a range-based sharding by date, where you say that I'll store for 1 month, I'll store all the meetings in this table. For the next month, I'll store this meeting in this table. In case if that is not even sufficient, you can come up to week. Even if the week is not sufficient, you can come to each day. You can create a separate machine for each of these. Is a good approach. I mean, see, in the table, you don't need to mention it that how many users can actually join the meeting. That is something which you can handle on the client side and the server side. Basically, if another person is trying to join the same meeting, then you can stop the user. You don't need to store that details as a part of your database, because that's a constant, and that constant might change. So you can keep that logic on the server side instead of keeping that logic on your database. Okay, I hope I've answered most of the question. Now let's drill down into the main design part of it. We'll try to figure out. See, this is fairly simple, right? I'll go to the APIs. Let me quickly talk about the different APIs, and then we'll have to figure out how to actually once you have created the meeting, how to actually how the users will attend the meeting. So that is the most important part. So first, let's talk about the simple APIs which will require as a part of this design. So we'll definitely need some login API and registration API. So we'll need a login API, register user API. Correct. We'll need a login user, register user. We'll need a create meeting. Create a meeting for update meeting details. And then finally we'll need cancel meeting. Or yeah. These are the different APIs which need. I haven't come on to the Now we have another one called start meet. These are the different API which you'll need for this. Now let me actually draw some diagrams on the whiteboard so that you can understand this. Let me share my another screen. Actually, I'll do this. Wait. Okay. So see, generally, whenever we have to create a connection between the client and the server. So yeah, here you have a client. Here you have your own server. Now, standard way to actually connect your client and server is the HTTP connection, which all of us have read multiple times. What does HTTP connection does? So basically, let's say there is a client, there is a server. Client will send the request to the server. Server will verify the certificates, send an acknowledgement and certificates to the client. This is known as two-way SSL. Client will actually again verify the certificates, or simply you can understand that client will send a message to actually connect with a particular port. If there is an available port, client will actually send a message, acknowledging message that you have a port available. Now server will send an acknowledgement message to the client saying that the port is available. Client will send an acknowledging message that I understood that there is a port is available and please create a connection. Once this connection, basically once this is done, then the connection is established between the client and the server. Now, once the connection is established, then the request is sent from the client to the server. This is the request which is sent from the client to the server. Server will process this request in some time. Once the request has been processed by your client, by your server will actually send back the response to the client. Once the response has been received by the client, then the connection is closed. Correct. So this is the standard way to actually make a client server connection. Now in this case, if you'll see we have to continuously transfer the data from the client to the server, right? So it's not just one request, you have to send the stream of data over the network from the client to the server, right? Also, there are users. So basically because I'm speaking, I have to send the data or the bytes which I'm transferring from the client to the server. Okay. Now there are other users which might be connected, right? And we have to push that data, whatever I'm speaking, you all should be able to hear about whatever, get the bytes which I'm sending over the network, right? And you should be able to hear my voice. So basically server should be able to push the data to the client. And here in this case, I am the client 1, you are client 2, 3, and 4. Correct? You have like up to whatever, how many participants you are, but there are multiple clients. So the server should be able to push the data to all those clients to make sure that you actually get the real-time experience, so that you don't need to send the request at a regular interval time to read the data and then receive the response back, and then finally again send a request after some time and then get the response. If you do this, then every time you have to first establish the connection. Correct? Which will actually eat up your some of your latency. Also, you have to send the request and again get the response, which will take some time. Now, to handle such situation, we have something called WebSocket connections to give a real-time experience to the user. Now, what is WebSocket connection? There is a client, there is a server, there is a connection between the clients and server. Okay. Now, client can send the request to the server, and server can also push the response, push the data to the client. So basically, imagine that this is more like a pipe. Here it was sending one request, receiving a response, connection is closed. This is more like a pipe. And you can keep this connection open for seconds, minutes or hours as well. Now, basically, this is your HTTP connection, standard HTTP connection, but it's so this one is your stateless connection. Here it's more like a stateful connection, and this connection is a bidirectional connection, where client can send the request or client can send the request of the data to the server, and server can also push the data to the client. It's a bidirectional connection. Okay? Now, generally, whenever it comes to the WebSocket connections, these WebSocket connections are HTTP over TCP. TCP is basically Transmission Control Protocol. What is TCP? TCP is Transmission Control Protocol. Sorry. TCP is your, I'm not sure why I'm unable to write. TCP is your transmission. Oh, wow, I don't know what went wrong. Just give me a second. Hey, am I audible to everyone, by the way? If you can mention yes, no on the chat.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Not sure what went wrong with this. Wow. I haven't seen this before. Has anyone used Excel Draw in past? Let me refresh it and see what happens. Or let me actually try to, first take a screenshot of this. It's basically your. Okay, I'm not sure what's wrong. Let me refresh this. Okay. This is more like a transmission control protocol. I hope this much is clear to everyone. So basically, whenever we talk about TCP, what happens is that, let's say you are sending some data over the network. Now see, whatever I'm saying will be actually distributed into small packets, right? And this packets, let's say this was my client, this was my server. So all these packets, 1, 2, let's say this was packet 1, packet 2, packet 3, packet 4, 5, 6, whatever, or packet 3, packet 4. Let's say this was packet 3, this was packet 4, this was 1, this was sent before it, 2, this was 3, let's say this was 4, this was 5, let's say, and this was 4, this was 6, let's say. Okay. Now all the packets to the server should be arrived in the same order, right? 1 should be arrived, then 2 should be arrived, then 3 should be arrived, then 4, and then these packets should be joined together, and finally the response should be created out of this. Why? Because let's say if the second packet is arrived before one is not arrived, it could be possible that you hear whatever I'm trying to say, you hear that in a different, basically you'll hear like the statement which I'm speaking before will be translated and delivered to you after the statement, the second statement. That's a bad experience for the user, right? That's why you are using HTTP over TCP for this particular transmission. And WebSockets support this. WebSockets are built on HTTP over the TCP. So TCP allows other devices to communicate through compiling of these packets and data and sending the data to correct location in the order in which it should be arrived. Are there any questions till here? I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, then please ask. See, the only what is the best part of this? It's very reliable in the sense that you will actually get the data in the same order. But the problem is that there can be congestion, right? There can be a congestion for this data because you're sending the packets, and let's say there is some issue here over the network, then there will be a lot of packets which will have to wait here on the server to be these packets to be transmitted. And that happens sometimes, right? When your network is not very great, you might listen to some of the messages in a sequence, like in a 2x or 3x speed as well sometimes, or you might not be able to hear some of the packets because the system will drop a bunch of packets, and then it will have to, because if you don't get those packets in a particular time, whatever packets are arrived, which was supposed to be arrived before, I mean, there were some packets which were supposed to be arrived after that, or what will happen is you will actually drop some packets. So let's say if 2 is received before 1, then 2 will wait for some time that 1 should be received. If the 1 is not received for a particular time, then we'll drop this packet. And even if it is received afterwards, we'll have to drop this packet and we'll just translate the basically the message for the package which you have received in a particular sequence. Right? So it happens sometimes that you might miss a message in between, and then you hear something else, and then you might miss something, and then you might hear something else. That happens in any particular system. That can happen whenever you have WebSockets and we are using HTTP over TCP. With this particular logic, when you are merging the packets, you might have to drop some of the packets if they are not received up to a particular point, and then and if they are received after a point, then you actually drop these packets and you just translate the message for these packets and deliver it to your user. Okay. Now you can use a UDP as well. Here, basically TCP is more reliable in the sense that video. Basically, if you need all the data, it's always preferred to use the TCP. If you are actually using the UDP, then UDP in that case, because you don't need to wait for these packets to be arrived in a particular order, UDP can be easily can be used. Here basically you don't need to wait. So overall the latency will be lesser compared to the in UDP compared to TCP, because you don't need to wait for the packets. The only problem is that you might drop a lot of information in those cases, and you won't wait and you will just deliver the messages. So you can use UDP or TCP. I've seen like some of the applications actually use UDP, some of the applications use TCP, where you hear the voice after you don't hear anything for a very long time, and then you suddenly hear something at a 2x or 3x speed. In those applications, you might be using TCP. There are some applications where you will lose the complete data itself for a few seconds. In those cases, we might be using UDP, because as soon as 2 is arrived, we'll drop 1. We won't care about 1. We'll drop 1 and we'll just deliver 2 in those cases. The main advantage of UDP here is basically the latency is lower, and UDP is faster compared to TCP, because we don't need to maintain the arrival, basically the sequence in which the packet should be arrived. Okay. And the disadvantage is that the order of the packet is missing, so you'll have to drop the packets which are actually delivered before the other packets. So that is something which can happen in case of UDP. In video conferencing app, you can use UDP or TCP. I prefer to use TCP because generally I prefer that you deliver all the messages, but you can use UDP as well. I'm not sure what Zoom uses. They might be using UDP and they might be dropping some packets. It happens only when there is a lot of network issue. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. The main advantage is that the latency is much more lesser in case of UDP. For UDP, I mean, there are other connections which are known as, I've heard of this. So generally, when we use WebSocket connections, those are your HTTP over TCP. There are some UDP connections as well. Let me try to remember the name. There is something called Stir or Stern. Yeah, I mean those are basically everything is same apart from the things which you have read so far. Basically, those are still bidirectional. You can send the data from both the sides. It's just that they are actually over the UDP and not over the TCP. And whatever we have read so far still remains the same. Okay? It's just that it's not TCP, it's a UDP. Okay, so you can either use TCP or UDP. Let's say that we go ahead with the TCP solution for this WebSocket connection. For the WebSocket, we'll go ahead with the WebSocket connections, and we are using HTTP over TCP in this particular design. Okay, now let's try to actually come up with a high level design. So let's see how exactly this will be created. So let's say that you have a bunch of clients. Let's say my client one is my client two. Is my client three. Correct. You have load balancer here to handle the standard load, right? Which we are having. The APIs which you have created for the users, all doing all the authentication authorization. So these are my front end service. Then these are my backend service. And this again is the load balancer on to distribute the load. So this is my user service. You'll have the replications of the user service. You'll have a meeting service. You'll have a replication of the meeting service as well. You again have a load balancer. And then you have the databases to store these details in the database. The way it works is client will call load balancers, will call the front end service, which are responsible for orchestration and authentication authorizations. Again, it will call load balancer of this. Right? And it can call the user service if the APIs are related to user service, or it can call the meeting services as well. Finally, again, it will call the load balancers. I'm so sorry. It will call your databases, which can be instances, multiple instances. Now, this is for the first part where we have the APIs. Now, let's say when we are starting the meeting, then we'll have something called client. Here we'll have the clients, and then we'll have something here, which is known as, here we'll have a video conferencing service. Now, let's talk about this particular design in detail. Again, the clients still remain same. I'm just drawing those same clients again. So once you're done with all the authentication authorization, there is a video conferencing service. Again, you can have load balancer in between. And you have the multiple instances of this video conf service. I'm calling this as VC service. Now, you know the user ID. So basically, let's say this is my user one, this is my user two, there is user 3, 4, 5. So you have multiple users. Let's say user 3, user 4, and extra. So let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So for each of this user, when they actually join the meeting, a WebSocket connection will be created. It can be created with any particular machine. There will be one WebSocket connection per user. Okay. So these are the different WebSocket connections which are created so far for these particular users. I hope you are with me so far. I'll come back to the other things. Again, I'll take your questions once I'll finish this part. So now we have the WebSocket connections created. Now we need to know, right, for which meeting, which are the users connected to which particular WebSocket connections. So we'll maintain a distributed cache here. We'll maintain a distributed cache with a good replication strategy. And what we'll store in this distributed cache is I'll maintain the meeting ID. And I'll maintain the user port numbers, host and port numbers, list of host and port numbers to which the users are connected. We'll maintain the list of user IDs basically, and host and port number, their host port number. Basically, we know that which user is joining this meeting. So as soon as we create a WebSocket connection for that particular meeting ID, we'll actually make an entry in this host and port. Now, let's say user 3 is actually speaking. So what will happen is user 3 will know which meeting user 3 has joined, or we can maintain another map. So we can maintain a user to meeting map as well. User ID attending which particular meeting ID. Now we know that this user is attending this particular meeting and there is a active WebSocket connection, and to which particular we can maintain the host and port number as well to which it is connected. Now user is sending a message from the client to the video conferencing service. What this will do is it will go and see to which particular user this meeting belongs to. This user is attending which particular meeting. We'll know the meeting ID. For that meeting ID, we'll know all the user IDs and their host and port numbers. Now it could be possible that there are multiple host and ports which are available for a one particular, you can have multiple host and ports for the same machine to which multiple users are connected. So we'll actually make a call from these to these services. These are known as RPC call. Again, these are like a TCP call only, remote procedural calls. And you send this data to these servers, and now we know that this data is sent for this particular meeting ID. So whoever users are attending those meeting IDs will actually push that data to these users over the network. And when this user is speaking, again, they can actually transmit the data. We'll figure out which is the meeting ID for this user ID. For that, we'll get all the list of host and ports, and we'll actually send back the messages to all this. So that's how your WebSocket connection is created, and that's how your data is shared in the video conferencing application. So we are using WebSocket connections for real-time experience. So we can say that we'll use socket connections for real-time experience. Now, a bunch of things which I have not considered here is basically, the quality, the video quality and audio quality might vary on different machines or different devices through which you have joined this particular meeting, right? So basically, there is something called transcoding service which can come into picture here. So basically, what you can have is after the video conferencing service, it will call some transcoding service. So there can be a transcoding service. And what this transcoding service will do is basically it will actually, there will be, let's say there is some data here. This is my data, or let me create a file. It's like some file data which we have. Correct. What it will do is actually it will have an encoder. It has some encoder. It will encode this data first. It will actually transcoder. Then we'll have a transcoder. Transcoder will actually convert this data into different quality. So it can convert a file into 1080 pixel with some resolution. I mean, this is the resolution 720p, 480p. 360p, 240p, etc. And based on this, it will return you the data. So you have got this data now. Then this data will be transferred on the base of which you have joined through a device. It will be transferred to you. I mean, again, into this video conferencing service or this video conferencing service, and it will, based on the type of device, it will send the data to the video conferencing service, and basically we will actually finally have the decoder in between, which will decode this data for you and return this response to the user. I'll stop here for 30 seconds. Okay, so we have basically encoder which will encode this data, convert this into, I mean, it can sit before this video conferencing service as well here itself. So we have this encoder which will translate the data, will come to the video conferencing service. Actually, no, we'll have to first transfer the data. Then you have to encode this data, convert it into, pass it through transcoder, generate different pixels resolutions of the data, send it to the other video conferencing service. Before actually it passes the data through the WebSocket client to the WebSocket service to the client, which will actually decode the data here in between and accordingly send it to the WebSocket. Basically, this video conferencing service can call a decoder service, which will take care of decoding this data based on the kind of connections you are attached. Now, it could be possible that I've seen that there are some decoders present on the client side as well. I'll have to check whether these decoders can be on the client side or the server side. So, I mean, you can actually use the encoders and decoders before even you actually translate the data. But as far as I know, these are done on the services side. I'm not sure if you can do it before actually you send the data to the client. If possible, that will be great. But I think you need to actually, first send the data and then only you can encode and decode it. But that is something I have to double check. But the main thing which you need to understand here is that this video conferencing service and the client, and then there is a WebSocket connection. I'll quickly check and let you know if you need to add the decoders, and transcoders are definitely used to actually, on the encoded files, it creates the different resolutions of those files. I'll have to check where exactly the encoders and decoders will be used in this particular application. Give me some time. I'll try to find on the internet if I can find a. Yeah, it can be done before even you call this, but I'm not sure if that's encoders on client. Encoders. If it is done, if it can be done on the encoder side, it will be much more easier for you to actually translate that data. But I'll check and let you know. I mean, you can do it on the server side for sure. If you can check if you can do it on the client side or not, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure that you can do it on the server side. We do it on the server side. But I think I've recently read that you can do it on the client side as well. I don't remember exactly. If you can check that, that will be great. But basically, you understood the high-level design, right? Because the main part is the encoding and the decoding part. The main part is the video conferencing part, and actually creating a WebSocket connections between them and actually translating the data between these servers. Okay. And yeah, you can pass the transcoder, finally call the other servers, send the data to the other servers, and other servers can actually decode this data. So this is the main logic of encoding, decoding, and translating. Now let me actually quickly take a look at the questions which have been asked here. Can you prepare setting your place of data? So recording is for days. How does WebSocket manage the data transfer? Why it can't maintain? I mean, it can easily manage the data transfer by basically what it does is that it has the WebSocket, right? So assume that these are like pipes, water pipes. But in these water pipes, you can, at the same time, you can actually send the data from one point to other point, and you can push the data from the other point to one point as well. It's simply transferring the data over the network. And this connection is open for a very long time. You don't close this connection. It's like sending the request, but you can keep sending the stream of data over this particular network. Basically, you don't need to close the connection. So that's how it manages you don't need to manage anything here, right? You don't need to store anything. It's just transferring. So you actually create each of these, each of the bytes which you have to transfer in the small packets, and you transfer from the client to the server over the WebSocket connection. Okay, if you're looking for something else, then please, explain your question. I'll try to answer it in a better way. Do you have a table which contains client has which connection ID? Yes, we are client has which connection ID. No, we just need to maintain on the server side, right? What are the user IDs and the meeting IDs? What are the host and port with which these clients are connected? We know the user. We are maintaining the user IDs. So user IDs are basically your client of the IP addresses. So we are maintaining those information. We can use RTP over UDP instead of TCP and WebSocket. Most of them are using RTP over UDP rather than TCP because TCP is not reliable. TCP is actually reliable. The problem with the TCP here is that, you actually, TCP is reliable, but it's more reliable than UDP, to be honest. It's just that there can be congestion on the TCP. So reliability wise, TCP is more reliable generally compared to the UDP, because there are no drop. You receive the packets in a particular order in case of TCP, which is not the case with the UDP. So TCPs are more reliable. As you mentioned, right? I'm not sure what is RTP over UDP, but basically you can use there is something called stun or turn, which is used over the UDP. More or less, the concept is still same. You have a pipe where you can transfer the data or push the data, or actually, you can send the data or you can push the data from the server to the client. It's just that it is done in the UDP format, so you drop the packets which are arrived at a later point of time. Why are we using 3 protocols simultaneously to send the packets? I didn't get your question. So see, to send the packets, see, HTTP is so these are 2 different things. One is the what are these network layers? So one is, I don't remember that. So TCP and how to explain it. But these are 2 different layers at which we are talking, HTTP and TCP. One is your basically the way you're transferring the data, and one is basically the way you're actually creating a connection. So these are 2 different things. We are not using the same protocols. And RPC is a remote procedural call. These are more like server to server connections when servers are calling servers. Again, underlying concept is again HTTP for that. And for the first one, we are not using the WebSocket connections when we have the APIs. So for that, we are using simple HTTP connections. We send the request, we receive the response, we close the connection. Multiple people in the group programmatically. Why can't it be maintained? It can be easily maintained, right? You know that these are the different IDs with which we have connected. So your cache can read the data for this meeting ID. These are the different hosts and ports to which we have to send the data. You actually call those you make a call, RPC call to those servers, those basically addresses, the machine addresses, and then machine addresses will figure out those details, and then actually they'll return back the data to the client. That's how you figure out this. What is the cost of server when there are multiple meetings is going on with multiple participants? Cost is basically, there is nothing like a cost. It's just that one server can have maximum n number of connections. So we'll have to see how many connections a server can contain, and we'll have to scale. We'll have to add more machines into our system if we have a limited number of servers, or basically if we can't satisfy the requests which are receiving, basically the number of connections which we are getting in that time period. If we can't satisfy with the number of connections which are available on one particular machine, if we have n machines, if we need more number of connections, we'll have to add more machines for that. There is no cost. It's just basically the number of WebSocket connections you're creating for one particular client and number of clients. So if you have 100 clients, you'll have to create 100 different WebSocket connections. If there are 20,000 clients, you'll have to create 20,000 different connections. And if one machine can support 1,000 connections or 100 connections, accordingly, you'll have to scale your machine, number of machines. Why we cannot use UDP? You can use UDP as well, right? As I mentioned, you can use UDP as well. It's just that, it's a preference, right? Whether you want, is it okay for you to drop some of the packets in between, or is it okay to actually receive some of the packets after? Is it okay to afford some latency? You can use UDP or TCP here. Either way is fine. Is there any other way? I told you, right? If you're using WebSockets, then it's HTTP over TCP. If you're using the UDP, then there is something else. Those are not known as WebSockets. That is something else. I don't exactly remember the name. Those are like STUR or TUR and something like that. You can read about it. You can see what are the alternative of WebSocket connections for UDP. You'll get some answers for that. TCP has built retransmission mechanism, and TCP there are handshakes which will takes time. So for media communication, UDP is better. Yeah, I mean I agree with you. UDP is better in the sense that TCP, connection is created once and for all. You don't recreate the connection. Once the connection has been established, then there is no handshake required again. Once the handshake is done, then you don't need a handshake again. UDP is better in the sense that you don't need the data in a particular sequence. I think you are asking the same question again, right? I'm not saying that UDP is not better. UDP might be better in this particular situation. You can use TCP. There are pros and cons of each of this. So WebSocket connections can be used for TCP, UDP. It can be used only for TCP. Yeah, this TURN or STUN. Not sure what is TUN server. What is orchestration? So orchestration is basically, distributing the, so these are microservice architecture which you are following, right? So orchestration is basically you receive all the calls to your front-end service, and front-end service will decide whether this call, if you have to read the user details, right, then you'll make a call to user service. If you have to create a meeting, then you'll call a meeting service. So that is known as orchestration. Basically distributing the calls from this service to different services is known as orchestration. And we don't have, whenever we talk about orchestration, we don't have a main business logic present in the front end service. Instead, we have the main business logic present in the business logic present in the backend service. So basically, front end service is just responsible for orchestrating the call to the right set of services. That's why we call it as an orchestration. How will we use an asynchronous processing work for video transcoding? So if you want to do the asynchronous work, then you can use queues in those cases. You can put those messages into queues, and then you can process the data. Now, again, right here, I'm talking about transcoding on a real-time basis. If there's a lot of data, then you'll have to use the video conferencing application. You can skip the transcoding altogether. You can use the transcoding if you require. But basically, you'll have to use some queues in those cases if there is a lot of load and there's a lot of data which has to be transcoded into a particular, particular manner. In those cases, you'll have to use the queues, and then you push the data into the queue. Transcoder will transcode the data, send back to the server, and server will actually, there will be queue receiver. Queue receiver will see that this data is for this particular machine. It will finally put the data, send back the data to other machines. RPC, HTTP to what would be the video meeting data transmission also be considered QPS calculation? Yes, I'm coming on to that. I'll talk about the QPS calculation. Can you make server to push clients? Yes, in the TCP, is it feasible? Yes, you can actually, server can push the data if you have a WebSocket connection. Not necessarily. You can actually do some, it depends. Again, you can send the acknowledgements or you can send the pings as well. Client doesn't care, server doesn't care about, in this case, server doesn't care about if the data was delivered or not to the user. So you don't need to send the acknowledgement necessarily in this case. Can a pub subsystem help us out here instead of maintaining cache of mapping? The problem with the pub subsystem is that there will be publisher, there are subscribers to the systems. Basically, these are the same set of machines, right? So I'm not sure how can you use everyone as a publisher and everyone as a subscriber here, right? That's the main problem with this, in this case with the pub subsystem. Basically, the same machine can act as a publisher, same machine can act as a subscriber. And you have to call different machines, right? So you'll have to introduce another system to actually make it as a pub subsystem in that case. So it's better if you go ahead with a caching mechanism instead of a pub subsystem, I would suggest. A pub subsystem will actually take more time to process this data. Instead, you can prefer like the system which I explained you, where you use the distributed cache, maintain everything in the distributed cache, and then read and write the data. I mean, make the RPC calls to the system to send the data. Those cases. So yeah, most of it I've covered. Now let me quickly talk about the monitoring. So sharding, basically you don't need to shard any data. You need to replicate, if you want, you can replicate this data on a master slave replication for the users and meetings, just to make sure that you don't lose the data. Authentication, authorization you can do for this system in the sense that when the user is logging in, you make sure that they are actually logging in the right username and password, and you pass the auth tokens to those users. And whenever they are actually sending the data for the next time, let's say if you want to update the meeting, only the user who has created the meeting can actually update the meeting. So you do the authorizations in those cases based on the user ID who has created this meeting. So you can use the authentication authorization in these cases. Sharding, as I explained you don't really need a sharding. I explained you where exactly you can use the sharding and how can you use the sharding. Just a second. Yeah, coming on to the capacity planning now. So see, WebSocket connections, we'll do a capacity planning separately for, sorry, QPS planning for WebSocket connection are different. See, now we know that how many meetings are created on a daily basis. So there are 3 meetings created. Let's take that on an average, each user is attending 10 meetings. On an average, each meeting goes for, let's say 30 minutes. Correct. Usually Zoom meetings are big. So we have to maintain these WebSocket connections for 30 minutes. We are saying that we have 30 million daily active users. We have 3 million meetings, 3 million meetings created in a day. So we can say that total meetings, let's do the QPS planning on the topic. I hope I'm not sharing my actual document. Let me share my actual document with all of you. Yeah. So we have to do the QPS planning. So I'll do the QPS planning for read and write, creating the meeting. That should be fairly simple because we have these APIs for this, and then we have the WebSocket connections. We can say that then we have WebSockets. Connections, and here we have to type send message and receive message. These are the two different types of message types which we have here, and along with this each message type will have some payload as well. Now to do the QPS planning, see, we are having 3 million meetings in a day, right? And we are having 30 million users in a day, right? So we are seeing that 30 million users in a day. So on an average, we'll have to create 30 million connections. So we can say connections per day will be, these are, I'm talking about the WebSocket connections, okay? We're talking about WebSocket connections. The connections per day will be what? 30 million. So we have to do the calculation per QPS. So read and write QPS will be same in case of WebSockets, right? Because these are just the connections. 30 million connections in a day, which will be divided by 60 into 24, 60 into 20, 60 into 24. These are the seconds. So every second we'll have to create 30 million divided by 86400 connections. So can we approximate this to 10 to the power 5? So 30 million is 30 into 10 to the power 6 divided by 10 to the power 5, which comes out to be what? 300 connections, new connections per second. Now see, the good part is that you are already, although you're creating, 300 new connections per second, but eventually some of the connections will be closed, right? So let's say if each meeting is going for 30 minutes, then one connection will be active only for 30 minutes, correct? So basically, although you're creating 300 new connections per second, there will be some connections which will be closed eventually after a particular point. And in, like, let's say that there can be high traffic in, like, at some point, and in that case, if we consider that as well, we'll actually multiply it by factor of 2. So we say that 2 to 3 is the factor which we can take. Let's say that if there is a high traffic at a particular time, then in that case, we'll have to support, our system should be able to easily support 900 connections. Now talking about the QPS for read-write QPS. So login API is very rare. Read is basically, meeting reads are very less. This is more like a write API. So we can say that the most of the APIs will be created. See, create meeting, update meeting, cancel meeting, start meeting. These are all write APIs, right? So basically, we can say that each of this user, there are 30 million users, and each of these users are actually calling this API one time in a day. All those are mostly login, register, also write APIs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 APIs. Each of the users. So let's say the number of meetings created are 3 million. The number of meetings updated are what? 10% of it, let's say. So 0.1 million, which is negligible. Then the number of meetings started are 30 million per day. The number of user login are very less, again 30 million users per day we are logging in. then the number of users registering are very less compared to the volume at which we are talking. So we'll ignore that. So this comes out to be approximately, we can say that we are actually having 100 million read write requests here. Right? 100 million write requests, so 100 million divided by 10 to the power 5, as I told you, you'll have to support around 1000 QPS for this. That's how you do the estimations for the. And the last part now is the monitoring and alerting part. So basically, you'll be monitoring and alerting. What all you'll monitor and alert? If the API is latency, correct? APIs, these are for the reliability purpose, success and failure rate. Number of WebSocket connections which are dropped off in between. Correct. Because the meeting is going on, but because of some network issue, there can be WebSocket connections dropped off. All these, and then you can raise an alert if any of this crosses a threshold value. Alert if crosses a particular threshold value. And what are the reliability metrics? So reliability metrics can be, sorry, these are the reliability metrics which I'm talking about. And then you have monitoring, sorry, product metrics. So you can see if the number of users in a day, 7 day, 28 days. Meetings, again, 7 day, created meetings, number of attendees, all these meetings, these details, number of new signups, all these will be product related metrics. You should not waste a lot of time on the monitoring and alerting. You can keep it at the end for like 2 or 3 minutes. Don't spend a lot of time on this part. The main part should be the main, time should be spent on the detailed design for your system. Okay, so that is what I've talked about. These are most of the details which I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions, please post your questions, otherwise I'll end the meeting. I hope you have learned something out of this meeting. If you like the meeting, do attend my next sessions as well. And yeah, if you're trying to appear for the interviews, then all the best for your interviews. Bye. You can take care. And I'm not sure if this meeting recording will be shared or not. That is something which you'll have to check on the platform from where you have joined. And also, when is the next meeting? So you will actually, you will get these details. You will get these details when you actually, you can get these details of the next meeting over the same, over the same platform from which you have joined. I can share the document with you very quickly. Let me actually make it public. Okay, so I hope all of you enjoyed the session. I've already shared the document with you, and you can get more details about the meetings from Learn. Meeting details and when will be the next session from the Learn. Thank you so much for attending the session. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact LearnBy directly. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the session. Bye. Take care. Have a nice day. I'll end the meeting now.